be here with you guys today. I just came down yesterday, so this is my first day getting to visit with everybody. I was down at the conference a couple years ago, so I know lots of good things always occurring here at the Tomato Shore course. So the presentation that I just kind of want to share with you this morning is broad, right? So we know that there are many areas of greenhouse production that you're going to be learning, and so you've heard a lot of different perspectives and a lot of great information so far, and you will more today. But this is kind of just an overview to give you a little bit of the waterfront of what might be coming towards you in greenhouse vegetable production. So to frame this discussion, I want to tell you a little bit about kind of the perspective that I'm coming from. So I work at the University of Tennessee now, but before I did that, I worked with Crop King for a couple of years, and so my perspective is really coming from the position of helping beginners, small-scale owner-operators, training them and helping them start their business. So I got a picture up here, of a 20-foot-tall glass greenhouse, right? And this is not the type of production system that I have the most experience working in. It may also not be the type of system that you all end up going into. So I just kind of wanted to frame that by saying that my comments, a lot of these are tailored to you as an owner-operator, right? So we're not going to talk about, building 15 acres and hiring an experienced manager. This is kind of from the perspective that you will be doing a lot of the work yourself. So I wanted to give you that overview as we go in, give you a little bit of a picture of kind of the way this discussion is going to go. So in our time today, we're just going to talk a little bit about time and people. So as small business owners, we know that you yourselves are one of the most valuable commodities. And what does that look like? Starting an agriculture business, right? Because it is controlled environment, but it's still very much agriculture. And depending upon your background, that may be a new concept, the types of risks and decisions that we make in agriculture. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about being a greenhouse grower, just some areas that I know you're going to need to spend some time and some tips, hopefully tricks of the trade that picked up along the way to kind of give you a perspective on some of the key things to pay attention to. And many of these have been covered from different perspectives and in different degrees of throughout the course of the last couple of days. And then I also want to provide an opportunity. I know we probably have some experienced and some mid-experienced growers in here, so we can certainly talk about what are some of the things that you've learned. If you could tell a beginner greenhouse grower one thing, what would it be? So we'll add in a few minutes there, and then talk about preparing a little bit for the unexpected throughout the course of your greenhouse growing career. So people and time. I think that probably one of the most important perspectives to bring to this whole arena of greenhouse vegetable production is that you're growing yourself, right? You're coming in to a type of growing system that has many areas of knowledge and information. And so you yourself are going to be learning about plant physiology, why water moves the way it does, and why temperature is so important, and roots and shoots, and how leaves really function, and how we can address that in controlled environment agriculture. It's a lot of physiology. You're going to learn a lot about nutrition, because that is, on a day-by-day basis, one of the biggest things that we manage in the greenhouse vegetable production system. You're going to learn a lot about pathology and entomology. Engineering comes into play in a huge way when you think about the way that our greenhouse systems are constructed, the way that we design all of our heating and cooling systems to manage the environment, to take advantage of plant physiology as best as possible. Marketing, human resources, so all of these areas of knowledge come into play. And when you think about those, you may look at that list and say, well, there are some of those, I'm pretty good at. And there are some of them that may be areas that you're going to need to make larger gains. So as we bring all these perspectives together, it's really a lifetime journey. And for those of us who have been doing it for 5 years or 10 years and 15 years, we could still look at that list and say, well, there's some areas that I've definitely made good gains in, but there's still some areas on that list that I know I probably need to learn a lot more on. And so when you think about the whole suite of skills that comes in to play, know where you're strong, know where you're weak, and work on building in those other areas. Because this process of education never ends. And when you think about all of the different types of areas that you'll be working in greenhouse vegetable production, right now you're doing one of them, right? So, or multiple of them. So you're networking, you're learning who your neighbors are in the field, where you can go to for a bag of fertilizer when you run out, or some extra rock wool when the container is somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. And so you're gaining those connections in your region. You're learning, you're reading, right? There's a lot that we can get from paper, but of course there's a whole lot that we can only get from in-person and continuing education. So the more we learn, the more spots we have to place all of that new information. And of course there's no replacement for experience. And so time only will help us gain some of the things that we need. And the final thing that I put on here is just the fact that, working in a greenhouse is busy, right? Every day, 100 different things. But when you think about the way that we can best track, learn, and take advantage of understanding our system better, it's by record keeping. We'll never really know if we're making good gains on our yield, or if we're really managing our environment as effectively as possible if we don't do a good job of keeping track of conditions, keeping track of plants, and keeping track of yield. So it's dull, right? It's not the most exciting part of our job, but record keeping is pretty important to help us integrate all of the information that we learn. So if you're coming from a completely different field, if agriculture is something new to you, then it's important to say, right, 9 to 5 is not really the way that we operate. And so we operate with very controlled systems. We have these great environmental control systems that can create temperature, humidity, and light conditions that we need. We can adjust the pH, we can adjust the EC, we can control our solution. But all of those electronic and mechanical systems require people, right? And so we joke about it, but in many ways it's true. We know that if things are going to go wrong, they're going to go wrong on Saturday evening or Sunday morning, right? And so there is no replacement for the people in the system, even though we invest highly in our control equipment. And we all bring a different skill set to the table. And so when I think about the growers that I've worked with over the years, we have some folks who come at it, they're great marketers, right? It's all sold out the door. And where you really have to work is more on the plant production end. And there are some folks who, maybe come from a background of production and have a knack for growing the plants, but the marketing is where they'll really learn to make the progress that really sets their business apart. So we want to know that we're always going to be working, right? And we're always going to be on the clock because this is our business and it's different than punching in and punching out. And we all have a different skill set that we bring. So one of the things that I like to say about horticulturists is that we're sort of the obsessive-compulsive members of the agriculture community, right? So when you think about the whole scheme of production agriculture, you have corn and soybean producers, everybody out there who's dealing with the weather, right? If there's drought, there's drought. Some of them have irrigation, many of them don't, but most of them have no ability, right, to control the weather. But we ourselves, as we look at the system, we say, those are risks I'm not willing to live with. And so we are creating a system where we have much more precision, much more control, and a much higher investment, which also means that in many ways, we also have a higher level of risk. Not that you can't lose a whole field of soybeans, but it's hard to lose them in 15 or 20 minutes, which could happen in a greenhouse full of plants if we lose our electricity, if we lose our power. We no longer have the ability to cool a house. So we are dealing with a much different kind of system than field crop agriculture. And so it's a two-edged sword. We know that we have a lot of control, but because we spend so much money on that control, we also need to maximize the gains that we get out of it. And we know that in some ways we're walking a pretty fine line. So whether you're coming from accounting, I was used to tease the accountants because they always calculate risk, right? You know exactly what your chances of loss are, which is challenging in a greenhouse industry. Or whether you're coming from field agriculture, there are lots of things that are different. the way that we set up our cropping systems, everything from spacing to the media that we use, all different from field systems. The cultivars that we use, right? We're not using determinate tomatoes, we're using indeterminate tomatoes, and they have different background sets of disease resistance packages. Everything is slightly different inside a greenhouse. Nutrient management is different, right? The way that we feed, just the fertilizer materials themselves. And all of these things take some perspective shifts if we're coming from a different kind of agriculture, if we're scaling up from home garden or a very small production system. And our control options. If you're used to growing crops in the field, and what you'll find is that we don't have as large a suite of pesticide and fungicide options as you might if you have an outdoor production system. So I think that one of the most important things when you think about people is to think about yourself. Because there are certainly going to be some areas that you alone are going to be able to do best in your operation, and worse, right? So, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and over time, you want to prioritize and pick out those areas that you know you alone need to do. Maybe you always want to be the fertilizer mixer. Maybe that's your area of OCD control, and you know that to get it right, you need to be the one who mixes it up. Maybe there are certain customers that you know you alone need to deal with. Maybe you're the one who changes the settings on the environmental controller, and nobody else does that, right? So over time, you're going to kind of figure out what the areas are that you know are priority one for you, and other folks can fill in the areas, but for you, there are going to be certain areas that you know could be most successful in your business if you do. That doesn't mean that you're not going to pick up a lot of other hanging strings and little pieces of production along the way. But there are going to be some things that you might need to keep in your own house. I think that one of the biggest challenges, whether you're very small or whether you're beginning to hire maybe even full-time people, is the fact that, and I can say this, you're coming from an academic perspective, I think we still sort of have a scarcity of trained practitioners in controlled environment agriculture fields. Hopefully we're making gains. But it may well be that as you begin to look at employees, you're hiring people from different agriculture sectors who may need an introduction to the greenhouse, or maybe they're coming from a floriculture type of greenhouse production system, which can be a lot different in media and the way that we manage our crops. So in some ways it's still a niche, and the amount of employee experience depends a lot on your crop. Right? So if you're growing leafy crops and you're just transplanting lettuce, that may be an area where you don't need a lot of experience. Turning people loose to prune and train your tomatoes, not a first day's job, right? So the way that you handle your employees depends a lot on the type of crops that you're growing, how much experience they've had, and of course, there's no replacement for that you. I think the last thing that I want to say when we talk about time and people is the fact that we spend a lot of our time when we're working in greenhouses thinking about the systems and thinking about the plants. And sometimes, right, we want to step back and we want to look at the big picture, and we want to say to ourselves, remember why I got into this, because what I love to do is produce food for people. And so our marketing, even our production and the way that we handle our plants will always stand a chance to be a little bit improved if we can think about while we're going through those menial tasks, the fact that it's people who are pretty important. This is actually my niece with some of my greenhouse tomatoes from a year or two ago. So we know that that our consumer is really our most important end goal. So that's a final note on the time and people. Always keep your consumer in mind, because they're the ones that are keeping us in business, right? So we are dealing with a niche market where a high quality product that exactly fits that consumer is what's keeping us around. The next section is just kind of some comments about being a greenhouse grower, right? Thinking about your day, thinking about the different areas of responsibility that you have, and just some of the things to keep in mind. Hopefully, what I'll be saying is if you just affirming some things that you've heard about fertilizer, solution control, about environmental control systems, and all those sorts of things. So when you think about beginning a greenhouse operation. Certainly this varies across different parts of the country, but one thing that I have seen a lot is the timing of your first season is important. Think about when your greenhouse is coming online. If you're a southern grower, you really want to focus on lettuce, maybe coming online in the most stressful, hottest part of the summer, maybe a challenging time. Maybe you want to hit a spring or fall market where you know it's going to be a little bit scarcer, right, in the food chain, and so it'll be easier to sell your crop. Think about when you're coming online, because getting rolling, right, getting high quality crops initially as you're visiting and giving away product to potential customers is important. And understanding that with each season, right, can come adjustments in the way that you manage. I think many times early stage growers get in the position where, well, you know, it worked pretty well once the first time, so I'm just going to try to do it the same every single time, right? Every single crop cycle after that. And when you think about all of the environmental changes across the year, whether you're in Michigan, I'm thinking of the charter, whether you're in Louisiana, whether you're in Mississippi, whether you're in Virginia, all of us are going to have to make adjustments. And so we want to come on strong, and we want to be able to adjust to conditions as they come at us. I think one of the things that probably continues to surprise the early stage growers is that full capacity in your house may be not an immediate reality. So this is a shot of a green. This is actually it's actually a greenhouse in Virginia, and I can remember being there pretty soon after they started production, and they had this section of Bibb lettuce in the front of the house that was gorgeous, right? Beautiful Bibb lettuce. And what you may not necessarily see is that in the back over here, right, it's not in production yet. So they have really high quality product, but they haven't gotten the entire rest of the house sold, and so it's a little bit of a process. And when you make your monetary calculations, you always want to think about the fact that I know what my maximum hay capacity is in the house, right? But it's going to be a little bit before I reach that. Another note, I don't think I put it on this slide, but early on you'll have lots of conversations with potential buyers, and they'll say things like, yeah, we'll buy all you can grow, right? And what they may mean is we'll buy all you can grow if it's at the right price and we happen to need it at that time. So always keep in mind that you're marketing early on, right? Without product, it's great. You've got to do some preliminary footwork, but you're probably also not going to sell all you think you are at the beginning as well. And I already said this, but I'm going to say it again. And that's the fact that when we think about improving ourselves as managers, and we think about making steps to enhance our operation, it all comes back to knowing what we've done and how it impacted our crop. So, if we have some health issues and we spray something, write it down. How much did you spray? How often? How big a difference did it really make? What about the timing of our cycle? Right? A day or two on a crop of lettuce can be a huge difference in profitability in your house. And if you don't know precisely when you seeded, when you transplanted, when you harvested each individual crop, you're not going to be able to track those things. And if something gets a little bit off, sometimes those clues are going to be what tips you off early on. Your maintenance practices, and that's equipment, right? That's when did you mix that last batch of fertilizer? If something's off, go back to when the last maintenance changes that you made in your house. How you manage your environment, track those temperatures and humidities, and any adjustments that you made. I think my last slide in this presentation is about making changes slowly, right? Or maybe changes only one at a time. And so we want to record any adjustments that we make, but we always want to make them in a way that we can know exactly what had an impact on our crop. Know your inputs. And so these are just things that certainly have come up in conversations, and so I'm just throwing it out there, right? Acid comes in a range of strengths, right? And fertilizers are not interchangeable. Many times we may be dealing with greenhouse supply companies, and their main customer is bedding plant producers, or their main customer are nursery crop producers. And so some of the materials that they handle every day and work great for some of their other customers just may not work well at all for us. So double check some of those recommendations that you get. Are used to going to Quadris to deal with some of your fungal problems in the field, right? Not labeled for greenhouse production. So some of our good fungicide tools may not be appropriate. So, right, check those labels. This is one that I'm certainly not going to spend a lot of time on because this is not an area of expertise for me, but I can say that as you're building your greenhouse, as you're thinking about how that system is set up, what your head house looks like, how you're going to handle your crop, how you're going to move your crop, what it's going to look like, always know what kind of food safety inspections are most likely coming at you, because the way you design your structure can have a lot to do with how easy it is to pass those audits and who you're going to sell to. Right? So if larger grocery store change is your goal, then you know third-party audits are probably going to be in your future. And you want to have that in mind as you're beginning to design your greenhouses. So I come from a background of really bedding plant production, which was what I worked a lot in college and in high school. And so for me, one of my favorite parts of greenhouse production is the transplant production. And whether we're talking about a leafy crop that is going to be in our house for 5 or 6 weeks, transplants are crucial because that growth rate is essential to profitability in our house. If we're thinking about a tomato plant that we're going to have for 10 or 11 months in our house, then the investments that we make in managing the transplants or acquiring them from a very reputable, healthy source is essential. So the timing, the production setting, and this is, I guess this is maybe one of my soapboxes, right? Maybe this is one of my pet peeves. We go into greenhouses and you see folks who spend, right, large amounts of money to maintain the temperature and the appropriate growing conditions in their house. And it's the early part of the season, and right there in their head house are all the tomato plants that are going to be there living for this summer. And they've got them under like $75 lights in this tiny little area, and they're kind of scraggly, right? And so when you think about the fact that that's just a little bit more on the front end of those transplants that are going to be your entire productivity for the life of the crop. So your transplants, of course, comes into play when you're talking about production, but also steering, right? So how easy it is to manage those crops can start pretty early. So in a focus on transplants, always very useful. Timeliness, and this always sneaks up on you, right? You don't really realize how close you are on timing until you're behind and you have a large section of open channels in your lettuce greenhouse, and you realize that a couple days delay can really make a difference in the bottom line. Or the fact that you got a little bit behind on your sucker pruning, and you get to the point where you may actually even lose some production on your tomatoes, right? So all of these things come into play. Control practices, probably one of the biggest things for new growers is a little bit of delay in reacting to, say, your first aphid outbreak in lettuce, right? Some of those things. So timeliness is essential. And over time, right, so your reaction speed will improve. You'll get to the point where you can spot an aphid on one head of lettuce at half a mile, you know. But that may not be true for the first time or two, and your reaction accuracy will improve. So I may sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth on this one, but both of these are essential because if you don't react appropriately, right, reaction speed is only detrimental. I can remember one of the first greenhouse visits that I made a few years ago. We were at, so this is a house over in the Mid-Atlantic, so I mean, none of you guys know who this is. So it's an early stage grower, and we were actually going to have a training workshop there that afternoon. And in the morning, he called me on the phone, and he's like, "Oh, we had a thrips outbreak in the house. Everything's a mess, but we're going to spray. By the time you guys get here this afternoon, we'll have it under control." And so we got there that afternoon and just, started looking through the house, and we did not see any thrips anywhere. I can't say that there never was one, but we did not find any evidence of it. Mostly what we saw was leaf burn on the lettuce. And so, he sprayed right in the middle of the day, and to this day, we don't know what it was that he was actually reacting to, because he reacted so quickly that the cure was definitely worse than the disease. So it's bringing these two together. We need to act quickly, but we also need to act appropriately. Certainly, I think later this morning, you're going to hear some about fertilizer and source water quality. So certainly this is an area that you need to know your location, know your source water going in. Test. Make sure that you're not going to need to spend several $1,000s on a water treatment system before you begin your greenhouse, because that can make a big difference in the bottom line early on. And start to test your solutions, so that this is certainly true in tomato operations, so that you're feeding what you think you're feeding, but definitely also true in our circulating lettuce systems. Over time and over differences in season and lettuce growth rates, your nutrient use is going to fluctuate, and so you kind of want to get to the point where you've tested often enough that you know your trends, and you sort of have a backlog of records there, so if things get off, you can know when, and you can have a guess as to how to get back in and solve that. I know that you've had whole presentations on environmental control, so we have great engineers here, and I'm only just going to say that keep in mind that your control system is very sophisticated, but it's dependent on you inputting the correct set points and knowing, know when your equipment is kicking on, when it's not, what's occurring there, why is it kicking on at certain times, and over time you want to conquer the fear of making changes in your controller. Don't conquer it too quickly. Don't conquer it without some assistance from folks who understand very detailed minutiae of those systems. But one of the things that I think may be holding some early stage growers back is the fact that they've never adjusted anything. They don't know why, right? It's just factory programmed. We assume that it must be correct. Know why it's doing what it's doing, and if you need to make adjustments, then make them carefully and with background knowledge and assistance. Monitor and calibrate. So I think that if I could count the phone conversations that I've had with equipment challenges, probably one of the most common phrases that I've said is, well, have you cleaned your probes lately? Have you calibrated your probes lately? And so we don't have probes that are taking heart rate, but in essence, right, that's what they're doing. And so our equipment is really only as sound as our last calibration. And so this is one of the most important things on a day-to-day, a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, is knowing what we're seeing, what we're monitoring, what we're tracking is really what's occurring in our system. And if not, then we need to make the adjustments. So that's kind of that's a little bit of the waterfront. That's kind of the broad introduction to some of the main areas of spending ourselves on our time and thinking about the people that we bring on board to help us. A good right-hand man or two can definitely save us a ton of time and lost crops in the process. We think about the importance of knowing the details of our operation and how we manage solutions and crops and nutrients and making friends with our computers and our control systems in the house. So that's just a little bit of some of the things that I wanted to share with you. And as we get to, we've got a few minutes here, and I just wanted to kind of throw it out at you and say, if you've been growing, if you have some experience in the greenhouse industry, what would you say are some of the most important things that you learned in early production, or what would you share with a new grower to say, year one, my most important lesson? It's a chatty crowd.
Still early in the day.
Yeah, it is. It's, 9:30, we're only at like our first cup and a half of coffee. We haven't really made it all the way to full caffeination level yet.
I've got a question that Steve always got me with Clark. In starting out this process, and I'm a process manager originally in life, so I got into, and I'm a spreadsheet geek. So is there a package out there somewhere that gives you those kind of basic checklists like you and a lot of other folks are talking about that just say, these are kind of the basic things you need to check regularly? And I've got some that are associated with my monitors and stuff and that. But is there something that check this, check that, do this, do that? A checklist process, because a lot of you guys have experience out there doing this stuff, and as we move into it, is there a template to follow? Whether it's for our region or just running a greenhouse and putting all this together. Yeah, just a rough cut, and I'm a checklist guy too, so it's just like that's my spreadsheet thing. Do this, do that, first thing in the morning, whether it's first thing in the morning, sometime during the day, and then you've got the basis of what you need to check right off the bat.
I think that there probably are beginnings of those tools. Probably one of the challenges is that some of those checklists would vary by region. They vary a lot also by the control system that you have in your greenhouse. So everybody's putting together different combinations of their fertilizer control system and their environmental control system, and sometimes different providers might provide different checklists. I am not aware of a really comprehensive, what would you say, Steve? Not that you know of?
Part of the problem, this whole industry is really in its infancy. And, we all, with time, figure out what those checklists are. It's probably, when you're starting out, involving yourself with the right people and the right company. Rick's Publications has a lot of ideas where to start. There's a lot of stuff that's floating around on the internet, some good, some bad. But it's really making that association with someone that can steer you from day one, to get you off on that right track. Chris is a computer.
He's a process guy.
And he's got all kinds of different, spreadsheets and stuff that he uses, but there are things that we've developed, over time that we feel that we need to take care of, and we need to flood that data on. When I started out, this was my checklist. Like what he said, is get in the habit of writing everything down, and that was the last thing I would do before I went to bed at night. Is take 15, 20 minutes, write down everything that happened that day. And I've got literally hundreds of notebooks at home that I've written stuff in. And it's good to go back and read them from time to time. You're gonna be able to start seeing patterns of where you messed up and what you need to do better.
And that's where I'm coming from. I think that you guys with the experience in that kind of this, there may be a market out there for selling programs or what. Even if it's a simple one from the education community coming out, or from you guys that have been growing out there for a while, to come forward and say, hey, look, here's 101, start a greenhouse checklist. And I got that there's different computers and things like that monitor your environment, that monitor your water, that do all those kind of things. I've got one but it's on my checklist to check that stuff. So I look at that thing just to see what's going on with this, and then I'm looking for trends as far as what's going on during the time of year. I just think as a beginner's tool, I There may be something out there that, and I partnered with a guy in a greenhouse too, and so I'm playing sponge, I'm trying to suck everything out.
The mentoring situation, Max's.
So Rutgers University has a document called Creating a Greenhouse or a Greenhouse Master Plan. And what it does is it goes through and it talks a lot about all the different types of pieces of equipment based on your location and your area and kind of a general idea of everything that you need in your greenhouse. And I've had a couple of customers that use that as a starting point to say, okay, this is a master list of everything that's in my house. I can use this to check each of these components or make sure, and it actually talks a lot about construction planning and things to keep in mind when you're just starting first thinking about it. It's like a 10-page document that's pretty helpful.
Sometimes good things come out of New Jersey. Okay. All right. So I've got a couple minutes left here, and I'm just going to flip through kind of some closing comments. So, and Steve already said this very eloquently. Know your resources. And I use this in a broad way. But know your people. Know the people who you can depend on, and you don't need 50. Right? You probably don't need 5. But people who know your system well and know your components and have experience in region and the type of production that you're doing. Know your lab, right? So know where if you have a question about your solution and or has problems, you know where to send that immediately. And so, test first, and then we'll deal with the results later. So, of course, some other areas of Plan B. One of the scariest things to me on the technical support end was working with growers who didn't have generators. So this was part of the reason why I always thought chicken farmers, poultry guys transitioning to greenhouses were some of my favorite growers to work with, right? Because they never start anything without a generator. Lots of times they already had one place, right? So knowing what your backup plan, even some backup water sources. If you only have one pump on your well and it goes out. And then once again, just people. Folks who can check on things while we're gone, folks who we can call at a moment's notice and say, hey, something's going on with my controller, we need to run and check on this. And then planning for the future. So we want to be open-minded, but we also want to be cautious. And so the cool thing about being in a young industry is that people see us as a great marketing opportunity for all sorts of new products. But it also means that we may be dealing with a lot of things that aren't haven't been tested over the long term. So everything from media to fertilizer mixes to different fans, everything you can think of, the controlled environment food production sector could be a prime market. So this is actually just a picture of a grower who was using a slightly different kind of growing media, right? So this is the new slab. This is the old slab, right? So we want to, anytime we make any transition, even as something as simple as testing out a new media, we always want to do it cautiously and in a way that we can really see if there's any difference, positive or negative. So, whether we're considering other cultivars, whether we're considering other growing mechanisms, other growing practices, other airflow, anything you can think about. We want to consider, but we want to consider very carefully and always in a way that we know the impacts of our changes. And I think that part of this is me coming from a science background, right, where everything's a variable and we just have to have ones, and so we can test it and know if it's really doing any significant impact. And so we don't have to be quite that obsessive in our greenhouses, but anything that we change, we want to change carefully and in a way that we know if it had an impact. So we don't want to change our cultivars and our growing media and our fertilizer all in the same crop. We have no idea then if there was actually any benefit from any of those tools. So we want to take advantage of new techniques, but we also want to implement them in a very careful way. We don't have to test everything out ourselves, right? We can depend on others who have experience in this industry. So that is my whirlwind tour of what you might learn, what you might see in year one, and I am On time.
Let's take some questions.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions or comments?
Generator systems, if you put one on it, then you need it on the flip-flop system, so when the power grid goes out, it flops back on.
That would definitely be the preference, because when you think about, of course, you know, I've lived in Ohio several years, so you got a negative 20-degree morning, right? Things drop quickly. You would just use, and it's even more true in hot summer conditions, you don't want to have your backup system putting you in the position of